Welcome to our continuing series Questions and Answers from the works of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Today's subject is Equality, Part 4. From Sri Aurobindo. Hence, the immense importance attached by the Gita in its elements of Karma Yoga to equality. It is the nodus of the free spirit's free relations with the world. Self-knowledge, desirelessness, impersonality, bliss, freedom from the modes of nature, when withdrawn into themselves, self-absorbed, inactive, have no need of equality, for they take no cognizance of the things in which the opposition of equality and inequality arises. But the moment the spirit takes cognizance of and deals with the multiplicities, personalities, differences, inequalities of the action of nature, it has to effectuate these other signs of its free status by this one manifesting sign of equality. Equality is the sign, and also for the aspirant the test. Where there is inequality in the soul, there is in evidence some unequal play of the modes of nature, motion of desire, play of personal will, feeling and action, activity of joy and grief, or that disturbed and disturbing delight which is not true spiritual bliss but a mental satisfaction bringing in its train inevitably a counterpart or recoil of mental dissatisfaction. Where there is inequality of soul, there is a deviation from knowledge, loss of steadfast abiding in the all-embracing and all-reconciling oneness of the Brahman, and unity of things. By this equality, the Karma Yogin knows in the midst of his action that he is free. It is the spiritual nature of the equality enjoined, high and universal in its character and comprehension, which gives its distinctive note to the teaching of the Gita in this matter. For otherwise, the mere teaching of equality in itself as the most desirable status of the mind, feelings and temperament in which we rise superior to human weakness is by no means peculiar to the Gita. Equality has always been held up to admiration as the philosophic ideal and the characteristic temperament of the sages. The Gita takes up indeed this philosophic ideal, but carries it far beyond into a higher region, where we find ourselves breathing a larger and purer air. The stoic poise, the philosophic poise of the soul are only its first and second steps of ascension out of the whirl of the passions and the tossings of desire to a serenity and bliss, not of the gods, but of the divine himself in his supreme self-mastery. The stoic equality, making character its pivot, founds itself upon self-mastery by austere endurance. The happier and serener philosophic equality prefers self-mastery by knowledge, by detachment, by a high intellectual indifference seated above the differences to which our nature is prone. Udasinavad asinaha, as the Gita expresses it. There is also the religious or Christian equality, which is a perpetual kneeling or a prostrate resignation and submission to the will of God. The movement which will lead us out of the disturbances of the lower nature must be necessarily a movement towards equality in the mind, in the emotional temperament, in the soul. But it is to be noted that although in the end we must arrive at a superiority to all the three gunas of the lower nature, it is yet in its incipience by a resort to one or other of the three that the movement must begin. The beginning of equality may be sattwic, rajasic or tamasic, for there is a possibility in the human nature for a tamasic equality. It may be purely tamasic, the heavy equability of a vital temperament rendered inertly irresponsive to the shocks of existence by a sort of dull insensibility, undesirous of the joy of life. Or it may result from a weariness of the emotions and desires accumulated by a surfeit and satiety of the pleasure, or else, on the contrary, a disappointment and a disgust and shrinking from the pain of life, a lassitude, a fear, a horror and dislike of the world. It is then in its nature a mixed movement, rajaso-tamasic, but the lower quality predominates. Or, approaching the sattwic principle, it may aid itself by the intellectual perception that the desires of life cannot be satisfied, that the soul is too weak to master life, that the whole thing is nothing but sorrow and transient effort, and nowhere in it is there any real truth or sanity or light or happiness. This is the sattvo-tamasic principle of equality, and is not so much equality, though it may lead to that, as indifference or equal refusal. Essentially, the movement of tamasic equality is a generalization of nature's principle of jugupsa, or self-protecting recoil, extended from the shunning of particular painful effects to a shunning of the whole life of nature itself as in sum, leading to pain and self-tormenting, and not to the delight which the soul demands. In tamasic equality by itself there is no real liberation, but it can be made a powerful starting point if, as in Indian asceticism, it is turned into the sattwic by the perception of the greater existence, the true power, the higher delight of the immutable self above nature.